Over the past decade of playing ARK, I've learned a lot of things the hard way. In this video, I'll be covering 20 of the most important things that I wish I knew way sooner. These tips will make ARK so much easier and will save you from hours of headaches. This video is targeted more for beginners, but has tips that apply to both the early and late game content so everybody can learn something. Without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy. First up, I have using the taming tracker. If you're starting ARK, you are lucky that you get to learn the game with access to this tool. This feature was added with Genesis 2 and ARK Evolved, so it's been out for exactly 4 years at the time of me uploading this. It's been one of the most useful tools if you know how to use it since its release for a few reasons. The taming tracker gives excellent information in every single taming scenario that ARK can throw your way. It's obviously most commonly used for finding tames that you're in the process of taming. For example, if you're looking for a passive tame that's super small that's crawling around, or even if you knocked something out and forgot where it was, this is super useful for that, of course. But you can also use it to track how much food the creature has from far away, what the torpor meter is at, and you can use it in multiple ways because you can go to the menu in your inventory and sort by tames in progress, already tamed creatures, and even just search for creatures. You can also use the taming tracker for other things that I'll get into later in the video, but just know that this is one of ARK's most powerful tools, and learning how to use it will make playing the game far easier. My second tip is all about the UI. Managing the UI in this game sucks. Here's a couple of pointers that can make things so much easier. You can access your creature's inventory as you're riding on it by pressing the Access Target Inventory button. The defaults for this are F on PC, Square on PlayStation, and X on Xbox. This is far easier than dismounting to access your creature's inventory every time you need something. This button is also useful for opening inventories of storage boxes, crafting stations, and dead or unconscious bodies. The reason this button is the best to use for those things as well is because there's no button overlap, so you pressing F or whatever your button is for console is just a lot more convenient than using, for example, the use key, which is super universal and has way more use cases than just opening an inventory. I'd also recommend using the search bar as much as you can. This is useful for finding all of one specific type of item to transfer or drop it. Let's say, for example, you're out farming metal on an Anki, searching stone in your inventory and dropping all the stone because Ankis don't weight reduce stone is very useful. It's far easier than going through and individually dropping each stack, and it prevents you from accidentally dropping the metal which you're out to farm. To transfer an entire stack at once without having to go individually one at a time or to physically drag it over with your cursor, use T when hovering over the item in PC, X on PlayStation, and A on Xbox. Being able to transfer items over without having to drag the cursor all the way across or click multiple times on console just saves so much time throughout the entirety of a game. My third tip is about fall damage and the many ways there are in ARK to prevent it. The most important one to know is that if you're on the back of a creature and you're about to fall after a big drop, just dismount right before you land. This will mitigate fall damage entirely from you and your creature, keeping you both alive. There's also other ways to avoid dying from fall damage, including having more than 430 HP because the max fall damage can ever do to you is 420. And you could also just have parachutes with you, glider suits, or even grapples if you're in a good area and you are pretty good with the timing. Of course, if you always have a parachute on you, you're going to be fine from fall damage pretty much in any single scenario. But if you're on the back of a creature and you're falling and that creature will take fall damage, definitely do the method where you dismount right at the last second because it will take a lot of fall damage if you dismount in the middle of the air to use a parachute. One more tip is that if you are parachuting down to the ground after accidentally dismounting off a flyer and the flyer is just hovering in the air, if you're out of range and you can't whistle it, simply use a spyglass. The spyglass increases your whistle range and will let you reach the whistle to get that thing to follow you back down to the ground so you're not stranded in the middle of the open world. Over the next month, my Discord is hosting giveaways for whatever ARK content the winner wants. ARK Ascended, ARK Evolved, or any DLCs for either game on any platform is fair game, so check it out in the first link in the description for a chance of winning. While you're down there, I'd appreciate you subbing and liking the video to help the channel out. Thanks! My next tip is all about stat allocation, and it is pretty different for Evolved and Ascended, so I'll cover both topics. In ARK Survival Evolved, pump movement speed until you can outrun most enemies. You want to have at least 130% movement speed regardless of the mode you're playing in, but up to 160% can be worth it in PvE. In PvP, you can pretty much pump this as far as you want. It's never a bad idea to be faster. After you've pumped all the movement speed that you want to put into your character, then you want to go into things like health, weight, stamina, and this will make the progression throughout the rest of the game far easier. This applies especially if you're doing a note run. A note run is basically running through a bunch of explorer notes around the map to get a bunch of XP. These stack on top of each other and let you level up your character extremely quickly. During these runs, you're running around the wild of the map defenseless because you just spawned in, so having movement speed to outrun threats is just really helpful and makes it way more consistent. You might think that upgrading your HP during a note run would be helpful too because it makes you more tanky, but this isn't the case. The reason for this is because HP upgrades in ARK only upgrade your max HP and not your current HP, so it's really not helpful during a fast note run. This doesn't work in ASA because movement speed isn't a thing that you can level there, but I'll get into that more in my next point. You can enable movement speed in settings if you're hosting your own server or playing single player on ASA. A lot of players prefer having this available, so make sure you know it's available just in case you actually are interested in doing it. If you do choose to enable this, just follow my advice from the first part of the segment. Get a lot of speed, a little bit of stamina and fortitude, and then just get enough HP to not die to fall damage and put the rest of your points into weight. Another important thing for the early game is understanding how you can navigate the map. The most common obstacle in your way of doing this is definitely water. Stamina is by far the most important thing when you're crossing the water. Do not try to cross the water when your stamina isn't full, and do not try to cross large bodies of water without some points into stamina or a plan. A raft or even just some rideable creature allows you to avoid dying to megalodons and piranhas because the creatures can tank for a decent while and the raft entirely avoids them. Trying to cross a giant body of water without one of these two choices is pretty much never going to work because if you run out of stamina, you are going to die to piranhas or megalodons. And the only way to cross these giant bodies of water by just swimming manually is by having a lot of points into stamina, which is generally a waste because weight and health are much better. I'd recommend pumping 5 to 10 points into stamina depending on the playthrough. More than this is pretty much always a waste. Stamina in the early game of ASA especially is just really solid because you don't get movement speed upgrades, so it's the best thing that can help you with those note runs that I talked about earlier in the video. You're also basically always going to have to cross at least one body of water, so having those 5 or 10 points before you attempt that with no other gear on you is pretty helpful. Up next, I have utilizing multiple forms of polymer. Organic polymer is a great alternative to regular polymer, and killing Kairukus, aka the penguins, is the most easily accessible way to get this organic polymer. You can also kill creatures like the Karkinos, Mantis, and Hesperornis if you want organic polymer, but they're a little bit less accessible. The Karkinos is super common too, but it's only on certain maps. The best polymer farmers are the Chainsaw, Mosschops, and Pelagornis. All 3 of these are really good. You can even make a farm of tamed Kairuku and you can just breed them and kill the babies for unlimited organic polymer, and this is a pretty good way to make an automatic polymer farm. You can also go down into the red zone on Aberration with a Dire Bear and farm an incredible amount of polymer really quickly. The downside for organic polymer is that it spoils and has a small stack size, so make sure you're ready to use it when you farm it. Regular polymer is also good, but it's just not always the best method. It has a higher stack size, doesn't spoil, and is easier to store on your base. Just a side note, you can farm the corrupted creatures in the Extinction Wasteland, and you can farm the lightning creatures on Thorokis on Astraeos, and both of these will give you corrupted nodules. These function the exact same as organic polymer. Splitting stacks is a really underrated skill in the game, and it's super helpful. There are 3 ways that you can split a stack: splitting half, splitting 1, and splitting all. For PC, splitting in half is fastest when you just hold shift and drag an item that's in a stack across from itself inside of the same inventory. This will basically split the stack in half, leaving half where it was originally and half at the bottom of your inventory. For splitting one item out of the stack, do the exact same thing I just described, but you're holding control instead of shift. And for splitting all, just right click on the stack, bring your mouse down to the split stack arrow, and then click split all. You can also use the right click, drag down to split stack, and then press the button for the other 2 as well, but it's much faster to just use shift or control while dragging. For splitting in half on console, it's triangle on PlayStation and Y on Xbox as you're hovering the stack, and splitting 1 is double clicking with square on PlayStation and double clicking with X on Xbox as you're hovering the stack. Splitting half is the most useful when you're trying to leave half of a certain stack of, for example, ammo or food inside of a storage box before you leave your base. And splitting 1 and splitting all are the best for when you're trying to spoil meat faster, because if you split the stack of meat, it will all spoil on 1 timer as opposed to on 20 timers. My 8th tip is using online tools. There's a ton of online tools for ARK that can drastically improve your experience as you run through the game for your first time or even on repeat playthroughs. ARK Unity is great for resource hotspots and creature spawn maps on any map including ASC and ASA. ARK IDs is really excellent for if you're looking for console commands to use, for example if you're playing single player and you're trying to find quality of life stuff, or even if you're on multiplayer looking for helpful commands like gamma for brightness. And Dododex is the best for when you're looking to tame a creature. You can go on their site and see the exact amount of tranks, narcotics, and food for whatever type of food you need based on your customized race and the level of the creature you're trying to tame. There's other really excellent tools for ARK, but these 3 tools are just by far the best in my opinion. I use them for about 95% of what I need, and the other 5% is from the ARK Wiki if I'm looking for information. I'll get into a lot more detail about ARK IDs later in the week. I'm uploading a full video dedicated to commands later in this week, so just stay tuned for that. There's simply way too much that I have to cover to go through that entire topic to cover it in a part of this video. My 9th piece of advice is learning creature behaviors. Even if doing this gets you killed a few times, simply running up to creatures to see if they're aggressive, neutral, or passive is really worth it in the long run. Many years ago, I learned that Therazinos are not friendly chickens and that Brontos are actually really nice until you shoot them. Once you learn how the creatures in your area work around your base directly, you're pretty much safe because you know how to deal with all of them. One universal aggression indicator is if something roars at you. The roar generally means that you've entered their aggro range and they're about to attack you or chase you. There's other general behavior stuff like pathing that you can manipulate once you get really good at the game, but just getting the basics down and knowing what creatures are mean, what creatures are nice, and when you're in danger is good enough for the start. You don't even have to do this for every creature, but make sure you at least understand the creatures that are in the direct area of your base. Up next, I have making sure that you keep in mind functionality for tames you go for during the early game. If you're new, absolutely go out and tame everything that you can get your hands on. It's a ton of fun and the game is a really fun thing to experience for the first time, but keep in mind some helpful pointers. Flyers are powerful, the PT is the best early game flyer, a metal farmer is crucial, the Anki is the best metal farmer for early game. A berry harvester is important, there's so many options for this, parasaurs, trikes, you can even use the Anki again, iguanodons. A powerful creature is really good to have so you can defend your base and start prepping for bosses and caves. Strong mid-game creatures are Rexes, Theres, and Spinos for boss fights, and for caves, Thylacolios and Baryonyx are the best choices. There's other creatures that are really good at one specific boss, like the Megatherium for the Broodmother, but these aren't the best to go for because they're not universally useful for multiple fights. The last checkbox for creatures you're looking for is a transporter. Something like an RG or a Karkinos are the best choices for the early game. It just depends on what map you're on. If you check these 5 category boxes for creatures, you're basically set for the game and you can just go do whatever you want. You're going to be totally fine. My next tip is avoiding alpha dinos. You should be avoiding alpha dinos pretty much throughout the entire early and mid game at all costs. Alpha dinos are faster, stronger, you can't bola or net them, you can't tame them, and they're just gonna completely destroy you if you try to fight them too early. On screen now you can see the list of every single alpha variant there is in ARK. The ones you're gonna have to worry about if you're on the island are the Raptor, Carno, and Rex on land, and the Moza and the Tuzo in the water. The Alpha Megalodon and Lead Sickness also spawn in the water on this map, but these two are not a big deal. If you're in the water and you're already at that point in progression, you're way stronger than either of these two creatures anyway, so you're not gonna have to worry about it. Once you get stronger, you can farm them for tributes and a good amount of XP. You also farm them for chibi upgrades if you're in ARK Evolved and you have access to chibis. Just make sure you're really ready before you fight these. The reward is decent, but the risk is extremely high because they tend to camp your bag from my experience. They really don't move around the map that much, so they can be a pain in the ass if you die to them. My next tip is about how to not get lost on the map. ARK has a ton of huge maps and it's really easy to get lost if you don't know all the ins and outs and you don't leave tracks for yourself. Luckily for you, there is a few ways to leave tracks for yourself. The easiest is just tracking a tame that you've left at your base using the tame tracker I mentioned in the first tip in this video. This is super convenient. You can toggle it off when you're running around the map, and when you want to go back to base, you can just go back to your tame tracker and start tracking a creature, or you can just have it tracking the whole time. However you want to use it, it is just a really great tool undeniably. It has an unlimited range, you can see it through walls, and it's the cheapest option for tracking around the map because it doesn't charge you resources, it is just a tool the game gives you. Other options are pinning the map, which is pretty accurate but it's not precise. To set a pin on your map, you open the map and press P on PC, X on Xbox, or square on PlayStation. The third option for tracking yourself back to base is pretty rudimentary, but it's literally just placing things like foundations, signs, spikes, torches, anything that's cost efficient on your path around the map. This will allow you to track back to your base from wherever you go, and it is, yet again, the most expensive resource-wise, but it is super consistent. Trust me, if you don't know where your base is and you don't know how the map works and you're running around like a headless chicken trying to find your base, it's a very frustrating experience. Up next, I have organizing your storage system. For anybody who's played into the mid to late game of ARK ever, you know that organizing your stuff is super important. The game has so many items, blueprints, resources, and other things that you might just run into and take. You really shouldn't be throwing stuff out as you play through ARK. Most stuff will eventually be useful at some point. So by following that logic, you're going to need a lot of storage. When you have a lot of storage, it's very important to organize your stuff in a really effective way, because if you don't, you're going to spend a lot of your playthrough time just looking for items in your base instead of actually playing ARK. There's 3 ways to organize storage. You can do the naming system, the sign system, or the die system. In my opinion, the dies are by far the most effective method for organizing your base. Signs are the most commonly used. You basically place them on your storage boxes and it says the words for what's in the crates. I don't personally like this. I think the signs are too big. I think it's hard to read the text until you're up close. And it doesn't really account for the fact that there's a lot of variety in what you can put into a chest. You can also name the crates. This is by far the worst option because you have to be right up on it to see the actual name. Dies, in my opinion, are the best because they're pretty cheap to make. They make your base look better, and by color coding it, it's very easy to visualize everything around your base, how the organization works, and it makes it far easier to memorize where you put certain categories of items. If you want to save even more resources, you can just dye every other vault or storage box too, because you don't need paint on every single one. You can use the neutrally colored storage boxes to divide up your storage system, and it makes it a lot easier that way too, and it keeps it cheap. One more really over-the-top method for organization that you can do on top of the dyes is just painting pictures of the item that's in a certain vault or storage box on top of it. This is very high effort. I've never done it personally, but I've had tribe mates and PvP tribes do it, and it looks super cool. My next tip is always aim to upgrade. There's 4 main ARK progression tiers that are linear in nature but helpful to follow. There's the stone tier, metal tier, industrial tier, and tech tier. Unlocking the engrams and making the crafting stations that get you to the next tier is really important for progression in this game. The stone and industrial tiers are especially important for progressing because they unlock access to a ton of new and useful items. This is good for giving you something to work for in the early game too. Basically every early game crafting station and structure gets 1 or more upgrades throughout the game, and they're basically always worth upgrading when you can. Metal structures are good enough for everything in PvE. Stone is good besides some exceptions like Gigas, Alpha Creatures, and Arthros. But yeah, once you get to metal, you never need to upgrade in the PvE side, and even in PvP, it's most of the time not really that worth it. But yeah, besides structures, everything in your base is absolutely worth upgrading. Tip number 15 is understanding how drops work and constantly farming them. Every map has a certain cave or other mechanic set in place to give you really good loot drops. These drops are the best way in ARK to get high tier items with ease. Drop colors indicate the tier of item you get, but the tier is not really that important. What matters is the damage/armor stat and the durability stat, as well as the cost you're looking at if it's a blueprint. Farming the overworld loot drops can yield good items too, but the underwater and cave drops are almost always your best bet for top tier drop rewards. You also want to keep every tier and every type of blueprint you get during a loot run. They weigh next to nothing, and lower tiers and percentages on blueprints don't necessarily make them bad. This is because during a crafting session, cheaper items means you get to make more of them, and if they're super cheap and they're still pretty good, sometimes that's a lot better than a really overpriced, slightly better item. Some maps do have exceptions to farming caves. For example, Extinction and Astraeos are good to do OSDs for drops, and the Genesis maps have really good drops from missions, but most maps are just cave based. If this video gets to 1,000 likes, I'll make a full drop guide, the best way to farm drops on every single map in the game, in one giant video. Up next, I have cooking way more. Using the cooking pot and the industrial cooker is really a great thing to do. They're easily the most underrated crafting stations in the game and should not be overlooked. I played hundreds of hours back in ARK Evolved without ever looking into these two, and the cooking mechanic is simply way too overpowered and fun to be handled this way. You can make med brews, custom food and water, broths for various extremely useful buffs designed to handle certain situations, dyes to help you add aesthetics to your base, creatures, saddles, everything around the map. These two stations are just so good. You can make custom recipes that give you varying buffs depending on what you want, with an ARK wiki page that gives you all the details and the breakdowns. And with all the other buffs that are available by using this station, it's a no-brainer. At number 17, I have doing dedicated crafting sessions. Using a Mind Wipe tonic recipe on screen, it's pretty easy to make. You can reset your stats and pump all your levels into crafting skill. Once you do that, you can spend all the resources that you stored up previously and go all in crafting all the blueprints you found from the drops I mentioned, all the custom recipes that you've cooked up in your brain. If you have a level 105 character that has all of his points into crafting skill, you can get up to a 107% quality increase on anything you craft. This is absolutely incredible on high tier blueprints and the custom recipes because both of those get way stronger with these percent increases. The only downside for these tonics is that there's a cooldown on them after you use it before you can respec your character again. The way you can fix this is using the setting allow unlimited respecs. It allows you to basically use 2 mind wipes back to back so you can do the crafting and go back to your regular character. If you don't have access to this command because you're in a server, just make a crafting character that is separate to your main character. Pretty much every big official tribe has a crafting character or has an old tribe mate who isn't playing anymore as a crafting character. You can also use the command slow-mo 100 and just AFK and let the timer run down, but this is a lot slower than the other two options. My next tip is not wasting all of your engram points by unlocking everything that's available. At the start of the game, just unlock what you need. Once you hit a higher level, feel free to go back through and pick out items that aren't universally great but still are useful. For example, random saddles or weapons that you aren't ready to craft yet or don't need yet are a waste of points. This is because you will commonly find those items in a drop before you even have the chance to craft them. Finding them in a drop will save you engram points, resources, and will give you a better quality of the item anyway, so it's just worth waiting a lot of the time. If you do waste too many points, which can happen to anybody, don't worry. You can craft a Mind Wipe tonic with the recipe on screen yet again to reset all of your points in your learning progression and give you a fresh slate. You don't have to be hyper selective as you go through the leveling curve for the engrams, but you should be somewhat selective. Tip number 19 is starting in PvE. Even if it's only for a few hours, PvE gives you time to learn the basics and become more knowledgeable about the mechanics and the stepping stones throughout the progression. PvP is also just really stacked against you if you're newer to ARK and you don't have that many tribe mates. The players in PvE have been playing for almost a decade non-stop, so they have a clear advantage in skill, experience, and knowledge compared to you. On official servers that don't wipe, there's also a blatant issue of them already having their footing, which makes catching up far harder and completely impossible for inexperienced players. Griefers also just suck and make the game less fun, especially if you lack a direction in what you're trying to do, so you definitely want to spend a little bit of time in PvE just to get ARK down by the fundamentals. Of course, PvE can be fun in its own right, but if your intention is to play PvP, definitely follow this tip. I personally started in PvP, and luckily for me, there was a guy next to me on the beach who actually did help me learn the game and got me into a really cool tribe. But the day that guy went down from the sky on the Argentavis for the first time and gave me a heart attack, if he just decided to kill me and grief me, who knows if I'd still be playing ARK 10 years later. So if you enjoy my ARK content at all, make sure to thank Taco in the comments, because without him, I probably wouldn't be making these. And last, but certainly not least, my final tip is to start on the more basic maps. Maps like Fjordur and Lost Island have almost all the content that ARK has to offer. They're super huge and they're very cool, but experiencing the core ARK experience from the island, Scorched Earth, Aberration, and Extinction before going to all those other maps just makes the game a lot easier to learn, and it's more fun in my eyes. The reason I think starting with the older maps before the newer maps is good is because if you start with the newer maps and then go back in time to the older maps, you're going to feel like you're missing some serious amounts of content, and it's going to make those older maps, which are really amazing maps, feel a lot less enjoyable. I just think if you start with the older maps first, you'll get more enjoyment out of ARK in the long term. If you're an experienced player and you think that I missed something on this list, leave it in a comment down below to help other new players. Thank you to my members for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, I guarantee you that you'll enjoy the video linked on screen now covering 5 must-know tips for every single map in ARK. It's easily the most detailed guide on this channel, so I'll see you there. Peace!